what's the only thing better than getting a second chance? It's gotta be turning that chance into a major success, right? We all love a good underdog story, but while we might know how they start and how they resolve, there's always a long journey from the valley to the mountaintop. At least that's been the case with Final Fantasy. Square's surprise classic didn't go from this to this overnight. But how did they get there? And what were the next steps they took to build off of their original masterpiece? Hi there, my name is Daniel, and I think Final Fantasy II is pretty creative. The first generation of console RPGs in the late 80s essentially boiled down to a ping-pong battle between two titans. Dragon Quest, the genre's forerunner, had revolutionized role-playing video games, and its sequel had successfully expanded that formula to a scale previously thought impossible. And even though plenty of groundbreaking titles would draw inspiration from it later on, at that time, no one seemed to be able to touch Chunsoft's groundbreaking series. Well, no one except Square, because their aptly named Final Fantasy not only saved their hides from bankruptcy, but it also managed to innovate Dragon Quest's formula in a totally unique way, faithfully bringing D&D gameplay to console gaming. Then the ball went back to Dragon Quest with its third title, which leveraged past developments as well as its own innovations to provide a more personal, intimate tale that players could emotionally connect with. Dragon Quest III definitely benefited from several of Final Fantasy's innovations, but ultimately, Chunsoft had chosen to stick with their MO and faithfully expand their gameplay formula rather than experimenting with a ton of totally new ideas. But in a move that would ultimately become characteristic of their burgeoning franchise, Square opted to completely flip the script for their second title. Final Fantasy II hit store shelves in Japan in December of 1988 and saw the introduction of so many new gameplay elements that, had it not been for similar motifs and UI, the game would hardly even be recognizable as a sequel to the game that had been released only a year prior. Everything seemed to be a reverse movement from the previous title. Combat was centered around long-term character growth rather than a set-in-stone commitment at the onset of the player's journey. And even the game's story, which previously had been created to fit the gameplay formula, now took a more central role in development and was actually fully formed before the game's mechanics. To say that Square was being ambitious would be an understatement. Final Fantasy II was a bold new step into uncharted territory, but despite this confidence, the game's original version never saw a worldwide release. There were a lot of reasons for this, the most significant being the release of the Super Nintendo and Square's choice to focus on the recently released Final Fantasy IV, which, confusingly, was actually rebranded as Final Fantasy II in the West. More on that another time. But today, we'll be focusing on the game's GBA port as part of the Dawn of Souls collection, which is also how I played the first game. If you want to know why I chose this specific release for these videos, feel free to check out that episode for my thoughts. What I will say here, though, is that Final Fantasy II comes with an additional post-game episode in this release, Soul of Rebirth, which is super unique and helps fill out the game's story a bit. Seeing as it's a first-generation RPG on the NES, I wasn't really expecting anything too special in the narrative department, at least by today's standards. The first game felt like a pretty generic fantasy plot, albeit with the crazy wrinkle of time travel thrown in. This time, though, you're immediately introduced to 4 unique characters with personalities and backstories. Firion, Maria, Guy, and Leon are fleeing from the Palamecian Empire, which has suddenly turned its attention toward world domination, pillaging cities and killing the 4 youth's parents in the process. You clearly don't stand a chance against the knights you're fighting, and in turn are immediately defeated. But by the time you're rescued by Princess Hilda and everyone's best boy Minwu, you've got all the motivation you need to wholeheartedly join the Wild Rose Rebellion. And of course, this motivation for justice is only stoked by the absence of Maria's brother, Leon, who was unable to be rescued and was presumably taken hostage by the Empire. But his absence for the majority of the game creates a real sense of disequilibrium. Like something just feels off. Your quest to defeat the Emperor, who is, let's see. Oh right, this guy. He's on the title screen. Anyway, your quest to defeat him is also a quest to rescue your friend, whose fate is slowly revealed as the plot thickens. And as I progressed, another thing that really stuck with me was the way the world itself progressed. Or should I say, regressed, as my adventure wore on. Of course, the explorable area consistently expands as you unlock new means of travel. Like the previous game, you'll get a canoe for crossing rivers, a ship for crossing the sea, and finally an airship to go pretty much anywhere. And this game also introduces another series staple, the Chocobo, which lets you travel the world with speed while skipping random encounters entirely. But I'm more interested in the game's towns, which change dramatically throughout your quest. At first, most are fully explorable, though there's a distinct air of oppression as the majority are occupied by the Empire. But after the Dreadnought is completed, the Empire wastes no time in raining terror upon the world's villages. Revisiting many of them at this point will show empty, destroyed buildings, with the remaining NPCs mourning their dead. And if this wasn't bad enough, the game's penultimate chapter sees the Emperor summoning a freaking cyclone to just straight up level what's left of the resisting villages. Seriously, at the end of the game, you can't even enter most villages, as they've been completely destroyed. This is an incredibly effective way of communicating the sheer power and terror of the Empire, as you literally watch the effects of the Emperor's slow descent into madness. This makes his ultimate return from death in the final chapter truly terrifying, and it creates real stakes in the narrative. But enough about story. Let's move on to what is arguably the most fascinating and controversial aspect of Final Fantasy II, the combat. Starting with some minor changes, each character can now wield 2 weapons simultaneously, which actually opens up a lot of strategic possibilities. Do you want the classic, well-rounded sword and shield combo? Or maybe you're thinking to equip 2 lances to double your attack power. Heck, you can even equip 2 shields, which does actually have its uses. Each character also has a dominant hand, which has a slight effect on their attack power. Equipping a sword in Furion's right hand, for instance, will be more effective than in his left hand. I didn't find this specific addition to be that compelling, but hey, it's one more layer of complexity. Furthermore, Final Fantasy II introduces a completely new weapon type, bows, and with it a new series concept of front and back rows. Any party member you want to protect from harm can be placed in the back row, which protects them from melee attacks at the cost of their own melee abilities. Those in the back can only use ranged attacks like bows and magic, since they're too far to make any contact with their melee strikes. This encourages a nice bit of forward thinking and allows for your mages and rangers to more effectively fulfill their roles while your tanks endure the brunt of enemy attacks. And speaking of mages, we gotta talk about magic, because it's a little different this time around. Previously, spells were incredibly specific in their application and had multiple tiers. Fire, for instance, was rather weak and would only attack one enemy, whereas Fyra and Fyraga were much stronger and would affect multiple targets. But this time, Square decided to say, no guys, work smarter, not harder. What if we just had one version of each spell type that got stronger the more you used it? And the whole development team was like, oh, okay. Or at least, I assume they were, because that's what made it into the game. Gone are the classic Fyra and Fyraga tiers that have become such an iconic piece of the franchise. Well, at least for now. Instead, you've only got a single variety of fire spell, as well as your others like Thunder, Blizzard, Holy, etc., etc. And in true dual-purpose fashion, each of these spells can either be used to target a single enemy or the entire attacking horde. The main trade-off here being the loss of power and accuracy when splitting the spell amongst multiple targets. Oh, and this also applies to your defensive spells like Cure and Protect as well. And like I said before, each spell you acquire in this adventure starts off weak, but actually grows stronger the more you use it. And this is where we see the spiritual successor to those spell tiers we missed so much from the first game. When I started doing my initial research on Final Fantasy II, I hardly had to search the title at all before I was hit with waves of internet complaints essentially saying the same thing. Leveling up in this game is tedious. It takes way too long, and you'll likely lose interest before the game's midpoint. Naturally, I was intrigued. I mean, how could I not be? Sounds like a pretty great sales pitch, right? You actually don't level up at all in this game. Well, not like you'd expect. There are no overall levels for your characters, so Furion isn't level 4, for instance. What you have instead is a handful of individual stats that are each raised on their own throughout the adventure. And the idea here, at least in my mind, makes sense. You raise your HP in battle by getting hit a lot, since the ones getting hit the most will likely be your tanks. And likewise, the more MP you use, the more it's raised as well. Strength increases the more you use physical attacks, and spirit and intelligence increase with your white and black magic usage, respectively. But if you're like me, it won't take you long to realize why this game's stat growth system has gained a reputation for being tedious. Whereas most RPGs have you grinding to increase a single character level, this game is asking you to keep track of over a dozen separate individual areas of growth for each character. Instead of being assigned to a specific class and being limited to the weapons of that class like the previous game, here each of your 4 characters can equip any weapon at any time. And as you might have gathered, using a specific weapon type in battle raises that character's proficiency with those types of weapons. What does weapon proficiency determine? Well, a lot of things, like accuracy, critical rate, and the amount of hits your character will land with weapons of that type. And yes, as you can imagine, the incredibly specific ways you have to level up each individual stat can lead to some Skyrim Iron Dagger-esque grinding. Except in Skyrim, the many paths you can pursue lead to vastly different possibilities and playstyles. Here, you're having to juggle all these things just to move forward in a linear story. And that's not even including magic, because remember all those spells I mentioned earlier? All of them, yes, all of them, can be learned by any character in the game. And because each spell needs to be leveled up in the same way your weapon proficiency does, you're essentially doubling your workload by loading up characters with magic. I mean, what was Square thinking when they did this? Did they actually think players would have fun using the same weapons and spells on goblins outside the starting town for 5 hours just to progress? I would actually argue no. And this is the part where I actually defend this crazy gameplay choice on Square's part. I love RPGs, and since I've played a few in my day, I've just kind of gotten used to the sad fact that at some point in each fantastical adventure, I'm gonna have to halt my momentum and grind out a few more levels before I can move forward. This has taught me the value of perseverance towards my goals, but I've also noticed that at times, I can take this a bit too far. This is the mindset I unknowingly walked into Final Fantasy II with, and although it took me a bit of time to recognize, that's what was stressing me out so much about leveling up all these stats. I was pressuring myself to level up every stat with every character before every dungeon, which, of course, was taking hours and just wasn't fun at all. And it wasn't until I started forcing myself to prioritize certain stats that I really began to see the value of what this system was offering. RPGs, among many other things, require resource management. And the unique resource Final Fantasy II brings to the table is time. By leaving you with 3 blank slate party members and a character growth goal that seems unreasonably massive, Square is essentially asking you to make a choice from the very beginning, although in a very different way from the previous game. In the original, you were formally locking yourself into classes from the word go, but here you're instead required to make a more nuanced decision of what builds you want to start working towards. Once I discovered that I could just invest in each character's strengths and have them cover each other's weaknesses, I was actually able to eliminate the majority of grinding from my playthrough. Each character's growth began to feel really natural, as they were each improving with the weapons, spells, and abilities they were investing in. And I think that was Square's goal with this system. Not to have players grind for hours to pump out characters with perfect stats, but to gift each player with a unique, personalized party at the end of their adventure that would reflect their specific choices and playstyle. Final Fantasy II, shockingly, is not topping the charts as many people's favorite game in the franchise. I had to play half the game before I really understood how to best engage with the character growth system, so I wouldn't exactly say it's the most approachable either. But Final Fantasy II took bold strides to connect with players in a way we hadn't really seen before. In a much different way than Dragon Quest III, this story feels personal, with higher stakes than ever. Furion's quest to take down the Empire is your quest as well, and the small choices you make along the way add to this experience and provide real buy-in for the player. Because choices aren't just a long chain of separate events. They're milestones, landmarks in our own personal journeys that indicate who we are and what's important to us. They're the moments we look back on, sometimes with pride, sometimes with regret. And each choice is also a step towards an identity, the people we're becoming one day at a time. What might that step look like for you today? Feel free to let me know in the comments below, and I'd love to know how I can encourage you as well. Next time, we'll be covering the long-lost classic, Final Fantasy III, so subscribe and hit that notification bell so you know when that video's live. Thanks so much for hanging, and I'll see y'all next time.